Hello, everyone. Welcome to another awesome day of FileMaker training. I'm here with Leland Long, who's busy texting his wife unit to make sure everything's copacetic. How's it going, Leland? You good? Oh, he's muted.
Most excellent. Had to turn my volume up. Yes.
There you go. Most excellent. I like that. So today's an action-packed day. Is today day 4. Today is day 4 of week 1 of the JavaScript training. So if you go to fmtrain.tv, the JavaScript training button right here, he comes down. You see Leland. He's got that very serious-looking face. But the training's been off the hook. It's been really, really good. I've actually learned quite a bit, and we will continue to learn, and we ask lots of questions. In fact, we've been asking so many questions that today is going to run long. I'm already telling everyone we're going to run long. We'll stop it when we're done. If you start bleeding from the ears, from the orifices unnaturally, then just pause, and then you can catch the recordings later, which is really important. So what we're going to do is that part 1 is the free training right here. You can catch the recordings if you push this button right here. I'm going to cover that momentarily. But I want to point out that week 3 is the paid part of the training. More and more people are purchasing the training. It's really great because it helps incentivize Leland, pay for his time. So he wants to come back and do it some more. And so the week 3 training is specifically about creating a native executable application using JavaScript, the tools that we have here, to leverage React Native, which is kind of the Facebook-based technology. It's not Facebook, but they own Meta or whoever. They own the baseline development environment, but you use JavaScript on that and allows you to create executable Android apps or iOS apps. So you can build an app that runs on your Android that goes back and talks to FileMaker server, right? Pretty cool. So pretty neat. So that's what week 3 is about. So if you want to invest in that, that's great. We greatly appreciate it. You would just scroll down here, find the buy button, and push that. That will be a private invite. In fact, I resent invites to everyone who purchased this. You are going to be asked to go and sign up for a second sign up for the Zoom event for that. That'll be handled outside of the live training time. And not next week, but the week after. So let's talk about this. So before we went live, we were talking to one of the video editors here at RCC. They've been banging out the recording. So what you're going to see in here, let me start again here one more time. So you start at fmtrain.tv, come down the JavaScript button. You should definitely register for the event. And we have turned this button on right here. And this allows you to see the free videos that are going to be set up. In fact, the free video for day 2 should be posted here momentarily, right? And then day 3, and then today's day 4. So they're running a couple days behind. You should have day 2 set up here shortly. Then the paid content will be down here. You will see, if you haven't bought it, you will see the paid content, and then it will be looking at you like, oh, you can't have it. So you have to pay a little bit, and then you get access to that. You get a license key, and then it turns on that bottom section for you like that. So that is what's coming up on the schedule. In fact, Monday, I will start with demoing kind of this front end CRM client as what Leland built already, right? That is kind of the goal with this iOS or Android device executable, and it talks to FileMaker server to get data out of it. So it's really quite great. So we're back to solving kind of this Android gap that we have in the Claris FileMaker platform. Okay, I have a question. So we've talked about, so for those of you who don't understand, I'm just going to cover this briefly. Leland, tremendous instructor. He has multiple sample files. We've been playing with the sample file. We're going to continue it today, but he also wanted to give away and show you where he had built Space Invaders and Pac-Man in FileMaker. So Leland, I mean, it runs in JavaScript, but the display is through FileMaker Pro. When are we going to cover this towards the end, or are we going to cover it on the front? When are we going to give this sample away? When are we doing that, Leland?
You can present the link or however you wish, the same way you did the demo file, make that available. They can download it whenever they want. We can talk about it whenever you want, if we do.
Okay. Yeah, if we do. Okay, so
just make the link publicly available anyway.
Yeah, so Margaret.
So everybody can play over the weekend.
Yeah, so what we will do is we'll save that kind of a little bit towards the end, I guess. So I guess Ken, Hot Air Balloon Ken, won't get to play with it. I can't help that. He's leaving early, so I just don't know what to say. So we have a sample file for this right here, which is really, really great. And then we also have the arcade file that you've created, which is extraordinary. And once again, that's all JavaScript. It's the logic and the code is being executed with JavaScript, which is actually the execution is much faster than FileMaker scripting. So in fact, it's almost too fast, I think Leland was saying. But the display, he's displaying it through container fields in FileMaker. So it's kind of a crazy lash up that he's hooked up. Now, so, and I guess there was one question about this that came up. We had a really great comment, and I've got to bring up Twitch, but it was Code to Go, I think. Is that who it was? It was Daniel, whoever the Code to Go person was, sent us a really great email talking about objects in the world of JavaScript. That's a really important topic to understand. And I wanted to kind of roll this out to Leland a little bit to get some feedback on that, because there was a conversation like, hey, shouldn't we be covering objects as a basic kind of concept with JavaScript? And I wanted just to kind of softball toss that across the plate for Leland to hit that. So,
to be fair, I would say that if this was just a JavaScript class, we would probably start with objects. He's got a very good point. Objects are instrumental in the programming world, especially JavaScript. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. But the reason why I've kind of glossed over it so far is because it's not a common term or concept for young, budding FileMaker developers. So everything I'm trying to teach in JavaScript 101, you've seen, and you had a little tiny introduction to some things to do with objects, but I've glossed over them on purpose, and I didn't want to delve too deeply yet because a FileMaker developer doesn't need that kind of confusion right out of the gate. So I'm trying to explain if-else case statements, basic syntax, semicolons, white space, while loops that we're going to get into today, working with array, stuff that I can say, look, here's what you've done in FileMaker. Here's how you do the same thing in JavaScript. Let's start there, and we will build out from there. So yes, objects are important. And here's the good news. If you have used JSON in FileMaker at all, you already have the beginning foundational steps to understand objects, because JSON is actually a way of describing and viewing and manipulating objects. If you've worked with the execute data API within a script, or if you've dealt with APIs that talk to FileMaker server and get back information via the data API, then all of those results come back to you in JSON. And so if you've had to figure out either the hard way or the easy way how to access that data and pull out of it or parse exactly what it is you want access to and use it, congratulations, you are well on your way to understanding JavaScript objects. So definitely something that we will continue to expand on and learn more about. But here in JavaScript 101, the first few days, we'll kind of gloss over that a little bit heavy material. Fair enough?
yeah, absolutely. And what I would say to everyone is that depending upon what happens with the paid training and how that turns out, and the people that invest in that, if there's enough interest in what we're doing, then we can incentivize Leland to come back and cover more topics in the world of JavaScript. Right, very, very important. So, but we've got to get through these first 3 weeks successfully. So far, it's been, frankly, kicking serious, and I mean that in the most positive way imaginable. Step-by-step learning here has been really granular, and for people who maybe know FileMaker at an intermediate level. But yeah, well, that's what we ended yesterday with, right? That's yesterday?
That's where we ended yesterday.
All right,
absolutely.
Well, I guess we can pick this up. So Topcat, Axel F. Stu, Tafek Akabi starts with a semicolon. David Angel, Canberra, a whole bunch of you folks are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Big long list. Mikey, Peter Geens, Labo, Larry, Jonathan, Gadidi, Foxy, yeah, and of course the code to go. Thank you, David. I think it was David, but yeah, that was you on the comment. Really appreciate that, because anytime you folks have like, holy crap, I thought this was an important thing, and should we cover this? And we might have forgotten it, right? So that's why it's really good to send us an email and remind us, and then it allows us to either bring it in later or cover it if we've already missed it. So that's great. So, all right. So next,
and it helps us know what our audience is interested in learning about, right? So that's great feedback.
Yeah, feedback is really good, right? I mean, I every once in a while I get an email from a certain person here who knows who he is, and he's like, hey, I really would like a live stream on how to price my product. And I'm like, and every time I see that, I just, and I'm talking to a certain person, they're making a vertical market product. And my problem is like sometimes you ask for topics like I'm not an expert on, like I'm not an expert in your vertical market, so I don't know how to price something for your vertical market, if that makes sense. If you ask me about helicopter training or FileMaker or this and the other thing, I can. But if you ask me about how to build a vertical market product that prices certain things a certain way, even if it's in FileMaker, I'm not an expert in that vertical, right? Like if you were going to build an application for warehouse management, right? I wouldn't know how to price that because I don't know what the competitors are. But whenever you send emails to me, even if we don't act upon it, it helps us know what you're thinking about, what you're looking for. We really do appreciate all the emails that go to support at rcconsulting.com. So cool. All right, let's go because we have a long day ahead. So let's rock this thing forward.
So we have 6 sections more to cover, and we're about a quarter past the hour already. So what I would like to hope to do, and Richard can see if we can keep on track, is maybe cover these next 3 and last sections in the next 15 minutes, and then dedicate the last half hour to this. Of course, if we go over, we do, but that's kind of what I'm aiming for, because these last 3, I'll give you a little teaser here. These last 3 are going to be actual case uses of JavaScript as you've learned it thus far, using real FileMaker data to manipulate. Sounds like fun?
Yeah, so we want to focus on that. So let's get through the first stuff here. That's cool. All right, cool.
So anybody use the infamous while loop inside FileMaker? Now I say infamous because it's still relatively new. I couldn't tell you right now which version it came out in, but man, it's not very old, is it?
I think 18. So yeah, about 5 or 6 years.
Okay, so a couple of years, yeah. So my guess is that, especially for beginning FileMaker developers, my guess, to be fair to you, is that you've probably skipped it. It's kind of confusing when it comes to everything that you've done other than a while loop inside of a calc engine inside FileMaker. I would speculate this is probably the most complex thing they've ever introduced, especially for the calc engine. Richard, would you be a betting man and bet on that I'm kind of hitting that on the head?
I think most people that are in the intermediate level would probably not use this function. I think the advanced people, the Kyles of the world, and some of you here definitely use it, right? But it's just that, it's something I don't personally use unless I had a compelling reason, and I can't think of one right now for it. So
okay. And I've actually used it a few times. I think where I find it the most invaluable is I use it when I'm creating a dynamic query to use with execute data API. Does that sound kind of a teaser?
Yes. Someone pointed out that Nick Hunter loves while, and I would simply say, as Nick would say, that's an abomination. It's an abomination.
Well, here's the exact same while loop in JavaScript. So JavaScript wins again as far as efficiency goes, as far as the amount of code required in order to accomplish a mission. And going back, this is what the FileMaker version looks like. So because it is kind of an advanced topic, we won't spend too much time here, but let me just kind of go through the basics of what you're looking at here. The while loop is divided into 3 sections. The first section is inside these square brackets. The second section is one line by itself here. The third section is right here inside these square brackets. So in technical terms, you could say it actually has 4 sections, because here's the 4th one. That is what gets returned. So all of this work is doing something so that this gets returned right here. And that's what we get back. In JavaScript, same thing's going on, except this is our condition as far as while that is true, it runs. In FileMaker right here, while this is true, the rest of the loop runs. So in that regard, these 2 are doing about the same thing. Now, these 2 things right here inside our code block, remember code blocks that we learned before are inside the curly braces. Here's a code block that's not a function, right? This is a while function, and it's got a code block with curly braces. So every time you see a set of curly braces, it's a code block which has things inside of it in between the braces that actually accomplish something, whether it's 1 line of code, 2 lines of code, or 1,000,000 lines of code. Okay. So what is this doing? Well, in FileMaker, you have this section up here that's kind of unique. You actually have to initialize and declare every variable you're going to use later. If you don't, the calc engine will give you an error and saying it doesn't know what greeting is if you did not have this line here that specifies that greeting equals something. So it's very, very strict. You cannot use anything down here that's not described within this initialization block right here. So in this case, we're initializing three variables: greeting to be a blank string. Our loop count is a counter, which is basically our maximum value that we want to run that's defined outside this while loop. And then we have an index for looping, and our index, as you've learned previously, JavaScript is typically a zero beginning index, where FileMaker typically is 1. So I forced it to be a 0 here. And our condition is while index is less than or equal to loop count, it's going to do everything inside these square brackets. So this is going to loop. This is going to loop. It could be 0 times. If this is false from the get-go, it's not going to run this and it's going to return nothing. But as long as loop count is greater than index, then this is going to run at least once. And what is it we're doing? We're taking our variable greeting, which initially is blank, and we're taking it and concatenating the index and the comma. That should sound familiar to you, because that's what we did yesterday in that for loop, right? Where we had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 separated by commas. We're doing the same thing here. Matter of fact, we're doing the same thing that we did with that for next loop. We're just using a while loop instead. This increments our index, and as long as our index is less than or equal to loop count, the greeting just continues with greater numbers. And finally, when this condition is false, it returns whatever value we have finally at greeting. So that's what we're doing. We're doing the same thing as that for loop yesterday. Here's the same thing in JavaScript. Now let's quit talking and go see it. Give me a number from 0 to 10, Richard.
4.
So we will hit init. That will populate our web viewer with our custom HTML and JavaScript as we've done previously. We have our text field with the number 4. Now we're going to run it.
0, 1, 2, 3.
So exactly the same as we did yesterday with that for loop, but now we're doing a while loop. So 2 different ways of doing the exact same thing. Here's what it looks like in FileMaker. Here's what it looks like in JavaScript. Fairly straightforward. The only thing that you're really probably paying attention to is the syntax, right? Because you're hand typing this in. You're not double clicking on a while step and having it populate this information in for you. You have to hand type this in. So you have to put the parentheses there. You have to put the stuff inside. You have to have the curly braces. You have to have the semicolon. Well, again, the semicolons are optional, right? We learned that too in day 2. So a lot of the things that you've been learning up until now hopefully makes this look a lot more, makes more sense. It should be, because you're slowly learning a little bit of syntax and rules as far as how to write your JavaScript. So let's just quickly go look at the FileMaker script, especially for those that have not been watching us up until now. For those of you that have been following us since day 1, this should all look familiar to you. Here's our script that applies to this layout. We've got our insert text into a variable that we're setting inside of our web viewer that's on the layout. We're exiting with true. Let's go take a look at the actual content. Everything outside of here is, if I can select it correctly, everything outside that's not highlighted is just our canned text that we've been using for quite some time. Some metadata up in the header. We have a body that just has one element. It's a div that's currently empty, has no content, and we give it an ID of results so that we can access it from within our JavaScript. So in our JavaScript, as we did all day yesterday, we have 3 lines at the end of our function that just gives us output. It logs the result to the console. It changes the inner HTML of our div right here to whatever our result is from our while loop up above, and then we speak it. And the first 2 lines is defining 2 variables that allow us to have a speech object that we need in order to speak the message. And then we have an our div that we get access to by using the HTML browser method, not sure what to call it, function that's available called document.getElementById. And we pass in with a parameter the name of the ID that we are trying to access. So with all of that, here's what changed this time. And it's the same code you were just looking at on the screen. We set our I index variable to 0, and while I is less than counter. By the way, where's counter coming from? That's the parameter coming to us from FileMaker. That's being populated from the text field that we entered the number in. So from FileMaker, we call this function, you'll see that in a minute. We call this function, we pass it this parameter, that's our counter. So while our index is less than whatever that number is, it's going to concatenate our text greeting with By the way, it starts with nothing because our greeting text just starts initially by default as blank, just a blank string. So this adds the number to it and a comma and a space, and it does that for as long as indexes or I index is less than counter. And this unique item right here, as you learned before a day or two ago, is our incrementer. So this says I equals I plus 1. So with all of that, this is the when we hit the run button.
I know
this is the
you
script
like
runs.
that syntax, but I'm not allowed to say the F word, so I'm not going to say I hate that syntax. But I plus plus, right?
Yes.
I just,
Unfortunately, it's kind of an industry standard. That's why I chose to use it. But you're right. Most of the time, I would change that and put in the word index. Yep. But I do like to kind of show it both ways when I'm showing it in class. That therefore, if they see it out on the web when they're looking at documentation, they're not all confused. What's I? How is that an index or is it not an index? Because they didn't, if I call it index all of the time, our students are going to assume that that's what it's supposed to be called. And so if they see it out in the wild and it's not, now you have new questions, right? Well, how come you didn't cover that? Well, I tried to. When we hit the init button, it populates our web viewer with that code, including the function, but then it does nothing. It just sits idle. Our run button actually says, take in a parameter, which is the value of that text field, put it into a variable called counter. And now in that web viewer on the layout called web viewer, run our function, which we called while loop, and pass in that parameter of counter. And all of the rest is just error checking, just in case the perform JavaScript and web viewer fails. And if so, it would show the user a custom dialog with the error code. So with that, if we go back and just as a refresher, if I go into layout mode and browse mode, that forces this web viewer to be blank. If I hit the run button now, there's that error because we were trying to ask it. We're trying to ask FileMaker to run a function on a web viewer, and that function doesn't exist in this web viewer yet. So we use this init button, which is tied to that script we were just looking at, to populate the web viewer. Now when we hit run,
0, 1, 2, 3.
Now we don't get an error because now there actually is a function in that web viewer called which loop.
right.
So I rattled through that kind of quick because I was trying to kind of give a refresher of things that we covered in previous classes, but kind of ran through it rather fast because if you're following along, all of that made sense. If you're new and you haven't seen any of the previous classes, all of that was brand new material, right?
Yeah. So I would really
Any questions?
if they haven't gone back and watched it, I would watch these events sequentially, and I would pause if I was doing this again, I would watch them and then I would like pause you. I'd say, Leland, shut up. And I'd spend 15 minutes playing with it. And then I would continue the video forward. I'd literally play with this sample file here, right? And pause you and then continue forward. That way I could reinforce and learn. I think it's the best way of learning this material because you're doing a great job with this. So
thank you.
Cool.
All right. One down, two to go before we get to some really fun, deep stuff. Dates. So in FileMaker, here's how you get the current timestamp. A simple function, right, in your calc engine, and you can do with it whatever you wish. All kinds of things you can do with it. Split it up, use it, whatever. And of course, as you know, it uses your system defaults as far as how it looks, whether or not the year's in front, the month's in front, what kind of, all of that is all that international change compatibility, all that's happened on the OS level based upon how your computer system is set up with preferences, right? So everybody's results kind of vary on that as far as what you get. Here's the JavaScript version. So what you're doing is you're actually creating a new object, right? So here's kind of that word. We're creating an object, a date object, and it's going to return an object to us, and it's going to store it in this variable called now. And this is saying, make it a constant, not a variable, which means it's not going to change. If and when I use it later, I'm never going to try to change it. It's just a constant. So there's the FileMaker version. There's the JavaScript version. And here's an example of how you might use it. In the FileMaker calc engine, you might say, hey, give me a date in this format, January 18th, 2023. And that's what it would look like in FileMaker.
This stuff we use all the time. If you, if you're doing any sort of serious development, you're constantly, and then you're changing out these individual elements. Like, oh, I always want the first of the month or the last of the month. We use that a lot. So,
and here's 3 different examples of getting a date in JavaScript with passing in parameter that's slightly different. You notice I have a typo here. I forgot to type the 1. Oops. So just pretend there's a 1 right there, and the rest of it should be kind of self-explanatory. Mostly, you kind of have some variation as far as how you can pass in your parameter and how JavaScript will actually interpret that and give you a correct date anyway. So either of those 3, as long as you put a 1 in there, will result in the same thing.
Okay.
Hopefully no questions on there. If we hit init, we hit run.
Today is February 24th, 2023, and the current local time is 4:28:18 p.m.
So we might just take a look at what I did there, because obviously that's not the result you were probably anticipating. It's a little customized, but let's see what we did.
I'm wondering if you put all that other bullshit in there, right? Or did it do that as part of that function, the speech function?
That's a good question. Let's go look at it. So here's the code. Here's our script.
Oh, yeah.
This is what runs when you hit the run button. Yeah. So this part is pretty common from what we've done so far. This is what we've done so far. Here's all the new stuff.
Yeah.
So what I did is I created a custom greeting that says today is, and then I concatenated the date string, which is taking the full date object and pulling out just a function called toLocalDateString. So JavaScript does that for us. Now that's going to differ based upon which OS system setting you have, as far as whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in the US, right? So the nice part here is that using this exact code will give you some various results based upon the locale of the machine that this code's being run on. That's kind of interesting. It'll still speak it in English, I'm sure, unless you can actually change the speech synthesis to be something else. That's well beyond this class, but not impossible, right? But anyways, what we have here is today. Go ahead.
We do have one question. So Lynn from Austin, who's actually going to be coming to our training in week 3, asked a question, says, so the new it's in Discord. So the new date parentheses will populate with the current date in JavaScript.
Probably it's probably going to be a current timestamp, which includes the date. And it's going to be in a funky, like UTC kind of standardized format, which is why if you want to pull the date that you're thinking of from it, you probably want to use this one line of code that I've highlighted here, which is creating a variable called date string and have it equal to that date object dot to local date string. That way it pulls all of that standardized encoded date out and turns it into something that looks friendly.
So this is a reserved function, or which part of this is a reserved, or this is the method right here, or the shit. I'm trying to learn all this. So you want to?
I think method is the correct terminology. Yeah, there's a method on the date object. There's a method called toLocalDateString, right? And because our date object that we got is stored in our variable called today, that's why we address today and not date, right? So we're saying, hey, in our variable today, which is a date object, run the method toLocalDateString. I think that's the proper way to say all that.
Someone's name who I can't pronounce in Discord posted the cross-reference to W3 schools. So I will just cross-post that other places. But yeah, good stuff about the date on that. So, and
that's a very good thing to point out, and I didn't do that, which is you can take this information, go over to Google, type in the word JavaScript, hit a space, and then say date parenthesis, and you'll get a whole bunch of documentation on that function in JavaScript, right? Now, if you don't use the JavaScript keyword first, you'll end up with a whole lot of other results too that aren't going to be applicable to what you're trying to figure out, right? So my recommendation for trying to search for any methods or properties or objects or anything having to do with JavaScript, put that in as your first search word term. Yeah, we got one more and we're a little over time, but we're doing all right. Arrays. So in FileMaker, our use of arrays are pretty much limited to repeating fields, and this is what it looks like. And if you've used repeating fields, this should look familiar to you. This would get the 5th item in your repeating field. So if you had a repeating field set to 10, a maximum of 10, how does FileMaker phrase it? A repeating field with a maximum of 10 what?
10 repetitions.
Thank you. 10 repetitions. This would be the way to get the contents of
really,
number 5.
Okay, I'll be very clear. But when FileMaker was flat file, this is how they compensated for relationships. It's a field, and then they give you extensions to this. And every once in a while, someone like Nick will use a repeating field. So for those of you wondering what this looks like, so this is repetition number 1. It's not number 0, right? It's number 1. This is what you always see for all fields, right? And then you have, then if you ask for more, then you get 2, 3, 4, and then eventually 5 down here, right? So anyway, very rarely do we use it. It's what we call also a one-dimensional array.
And I will say that repeating fields are extremely useful for UI, for user interface. So tricks to play on a layout, repeating fields are genius. So used in the correct way, repeating fields give you a lot of value and a lot of power. Used incorrectly, they can give you a lot of pain.
So David Angel,
don't use them for invoice.
Yeah, David Angel says repeating fields behave similar to multi-value. So kind of in a lot of ways, but a multi-value is where you have a return delimited list, right? So it's like a delimited value list, right? So it's value return, value return. A lot of ways that can be an array too. It's what it is just different constructs, right? Different constructs within the platform. But yeah, newer developers come to me and they go, hey, what's the difference between this and a multi-value value list, right? And it's a lot of ways very similar. So yeah.
A lot of similarities, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the JavaScript version of declaring or getting the value of an array, the 5th item in the array, and storing it in a new variable. So this, in a new variable called myArrayValue, you're telling it to be assigned the value of another array, the 5th element of it. Now in JavaScript, this is actually your 6th element, right? Because it starts with a 0 index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is actually the 6th element in the array. In FileMaker, it would be the 5th. So there's your one layer of confusion as far as with arrays. What's the beginning index? Is it 0 or 1? FileMaker is 1, JavaScript 0.
Yeah, exactly.
Most programming languages are 0.
Yeah, that's because Claris is special. So
So ever used the data API? If so, you've gotten back some JSON, which includes arrays. So this is just kind of a quick glimpse of dealing with that. Let's kind of take a look at it. If I can make this so we can see it. Here's an execute FileMaker data API request. This is the way to create a valid query to use for the data API, and that's a class all to itself, right? Have you covered that at all in any previous classes?
We've done some JSON, we've done it, but I don't know it was a real long class. We probably, realistically, if we could figure out how to convince you to come back and do probably Kyle's talked about it. We've talked about it on, but I don't know if we've spent 4 or 5 days just beating the crap out of that topic, which is probably what needs to happen, because that's where you'd really hammer the object stuff, right? So
yes,
yeah. So yeah.
And if you haven't covered that and it's a good demand, I'm game for putting that on my project to-do list. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I
just don't want to repeat something somebody else has already done. That's all.
I would have to go back. Oh, it's Scott Kane says, but whenever they buzz, that's Nick Hunter's way of saying, do you like that idea of having a detailed JSON object kind of class? And so we have at least one.
Okay. Maybe start with JSON and move on to execute data API. Yeah.
3 of the people who have bought from you are buzzing in. Bought week 3 from you.
Nice.
And that they like that. So.
Because they paid for the class, their vote counts as 10.
Well, because they're actually willing to put money in on it. Yeah, their vote counts extra, right? So
that's right. They get bonus points for their buzzers. Okay.
Buzzers, yeah.
So if this looks confusing, don't worry about it. If you actually executed it in FileMaker, it would work, and this would be your results. This is your database info. It came from this database, this particular layout, this table. There was a record count returned of 1. And here's the data you get back, and it's in an array, right? Here's the square brackets. So you have an array of 1 object, so it returned 1 record. And inside there, you have an element called field data. And inside there, you have an object called a text field, and there's its value. And there was no portal data returned. There's the record ID that's hidden under the hood. There's the mod ID that's hidden under the hood. And our messages returns an OK result. So this looks kind of complicated if you haven't seen it before. But it's what you would get back in FileMaker today if you ran that query on this database. Here's what the same thing kind of looks like in JavaScript as far as the returned results. And here's an array with one object in it. And there's the field data with one object. You notice it looks the same because JSON is the same of what JavaScript would use. About the only difference you're going to see is double quotes. Some of these have it, some of it doesn't. Let's see, our array inside of data, no quotes there. Yeah, it's just basically from this data value on. So this bracket to bracket to bracket right here is the same as this bracket to bracket right there. It's just identical.
I'm getting
So
more buzzing.
FileMaker's talking the same language. Go ahead.
People are buzzing in for the JSON thing, the Java class.
Okay.
Buzzing in.
So I think that's about as far as I'm going to take it. Mostly it's just kind of starting to wrap your head around arrays. And even if they don't make sense yet, the more you use them, the more they'll make sense. So I think with that, we are 40 minutes in. Now is a good time to move on to some real hefty stuff. And I will let you handle the questions coming in because this is, if anything, this is going to generate questions. But I'll tell you, we only have so much time to cover it. But these three examples here are going to show you how we can use some sample data inside this database. And we're going to manipulate it and use it using JavaScript, and we're going to get back some results. So this is kind of what probably is, this is our end game for JavaScript 101. This is the real nuts and bolts. Let's go look at the sample data first.
Abel MacLeod of Middle Island, New York.
So I got the speech thing turned on. That's optional, of course. But really what I've got here is I've got 1 million records in this table. And for the sample file, number one, I bought these 1 million records as sample data from Brian Dunning's site. So I paid a little bit of money to get the 1 million records and shove them in here. And I don't want to rip anything off from him. So when I made the sample file available to everybody, I slimmed it way down. I think there's 100 or 1,000 records in there. So if you want more, Brian Dunning's site can give you quick access to a lot more. They're all guaranteed to be unique, evidently, however he generated those or compiled those. Everything's supposed to be unique and totally fictitious. And it includes things like web addresses, company names. The only thing it did not include was related data. So I decided I wanted some basic related data, so I created that. And all I did in this sample related data is I created 306,000 random records. And I wrote a script that would go through. First of all, I pulled in some real data from my workplace, as far as some invoice numbers and totals, just some random scattering of invoices. Brought them in here, had 306,000 of them. Then I wrote a script that would go through and create a randomized parent ID that actually related back to one of something over here.
Abel MacLeod of Middle Island, New York.
So as you scroll through these, you'll notice with the portal on the right, some of these don't have any related data at all. This one has one related invoice. And this one down here has 2 related invoices, and that just happened by randomness. So we've got some sample data, we've got some sample related invoice information, and now we're going to go play with that. Let's start here. I'm going to run the project first. Actually, I'm going to go into the script and make sure we've got this thing slowed down. I don't want to run this on 1 million records because some of these have some things to chunk through. Let's start here. You notice all the scripts pretty much look the same. I try to keep most of the scripts looking the same so that nothing really confuses anybody that's been following up until now. Looks a little bit lengthy, but let's see how many records I'm dealing with here. Where is my limiter? Been a while since I looked at this. Where's my limiter? Where's my limiter?
I don't see a limiter.
It's probably right here in the execute. Yes, there's my limit, 100 records. Good. Okay. So let's run this. Now this is only going to run on the first 100 records in the database. Run. Run. I don't think I clicked it. Run. There it goes. And it's done. JavaScript just chunked through those 100 records and came up with a custom result. Okay. If we take a look at that in a text view, get it outside of this field. New window, paste. There we go. There's where we got back. Let's see if we can kind of show there. That's really close. There we go. There's the result. What did, oh, that's actually 2 lines. And
It's
you'll
two.
notice there's
It's
one
two.
result here, and then there's two. So there's two results per line there. But you see what my result was, is that it should look familiar to you if you're comfortable with JSON. Let's just look, let's blow this way up and look at just one of them. I created a single first of all, the entire thing is returned in an array. So at the very beginning and at the very end, you'll see the square bracket. Each object within the array is within the curly braces, like a code block, and they're all separated by commas, right? Now, inside, I only have one field, full name. So there's our key value pair. The key is full name. The value is but, comma, James. So that's one record from the database. Here is the second record, and here is the third record, so on and so forth, okay? So all this did was it looked through the data API results and it pulled out just the full name and created an array of objects coming back to FileMaker, and we populated in this text field, right? Has anybody used JavaScript to do this before? I don't know. But do you kind of see what we did? I mean, now we're going to go take a look at the nuts and bolts and see how we did it. But is there a complete understanding with what we've accomplished here?
That I'm playing air traffic control, so the answer is I understand it. Do any of you folks have any questions that are on topic?
We do have a question, by the way. How fast would that be on 500K records?
Well, let's do it because I have 1 million in here. We can test that. So we just did it on just did it on 100.
It'll
So
blow the
let's
crap
change
out
that.
of FileMaker. FileMaker can't even keep up with this. There's no way. Yeah.
So now I'm going to change it from 100 to 1,000. So this time when it runs, it's going to run through 1,000. Now what it's doing is when we hit run here, it's going to do an execute data API call in FileMaker from this database, from this table down here, sample data, and it's going to pull out it's going to return the first 1,000 records. Then JavaScript is going to take that information, parse through it, loop through it, and generate a full name list array, right? It's going to return 1,000 this time. And it's going to be 1,000 of the first 1,000 records from that sample database. It's going to return one object for each one with the full name key value pair. Follow? So I don't need to hit init again because all that code is still sitting in our web viewer. So let me hit run, and it's done. So that was less than a second. That was probably less than a half a second.
Yeah.
So that was for 1,000 records. Are you impressed yet?
No, go bigger.
I mean, that's the data execute data API and the JavaScript work and returning it into a text field. That's like 3 major sections in less than a second, right? So let's go to 10,000 records and save that and go back and hit run. And oh, that's taking a little longer. That was about what, 3 seconds, 3 or 4 seconds for 10,000 records. So if you multiply 3 seconds by 50, you'll get how much time it'll take on 50,000 records, right? I don't want to do it yet. We can do stuff like that towards the end, but we're only in our first section out of 3, and we're already at 10 minutes to the hour. So let's take a look at the script that did that again. First off, let's look at the execute API. This was the query that I generated. Here's the layout that it's using. Here's my limiter that limits it to the first 10,000 records. And here's the query, which has to be in an array. So we create an array right here. And we say, well, what field do we want to search by? We want to search by the ID field. And what are we searching by? A star or a wildcard. So basically, find me the first 1,000 records. Who cares what's in that field? Just as long as ID has a value, right? That's what this is doing. So there's our query. We check for an error just in case executing that failed. We shove the results into a variable called results. If we had an error, we show a custom dialog. And as long as there's no error, we run a function in our web viewer called data API processing, and we pass the parameter in of that entire 10,000 record block that came from FileMaker.
Yeah.
And then the rest is just boilerplate that we did before.
Run that, but
now,
David did have a question about what if you put A or B in there instead of the wildcard, right? So,
then it would search specifically for records that match whatever you put in there, right? I just wanted back the first 10,000 regardless of the data.
Right. Okay.
You can narrow that query down to certain state equals this, first name has to start with a B. You can do all that. That's standard FileMaker behavior. Nothing special there. But I think you're kind of missing the point, which is once we have a found set, that's what we're interested in right now. We don't really care what our find request is, right?
Right.
So once we have it, we are returning the entire data API results as a single parameter to that function in our web viewer. Now, our function is going to do a bunch of work, and then it's going to trigger a FileMaker script and pass it back the results. Well, let's look at that script. That's right here. Well, that's not very different than what we've looked at before. Here's the parameter coming back to us, and we're simply dumping all of it that we get back into that text field, and we're done. Not too much FileMaker work going on there. So last but not least, let's go take a look at the script that generated that data. And this is output, including the return count and the count. And I commented out the div. So here's the call to FileMaker to say, hey, pass us back the results when you're done. Up here, we are declaring 4 variables. One of it is just the HTML div element down here. That's the first one. Now, this is interesting. Here's the name of our function, data API processing. Here's the parameter that comes in. That's all of the execute data API results right there, and it's populated into a variable called data API results. But it comes in as a string. So the first thing we have to do is we have to convert that into a JSON object. And we do that with a JSON JavaScript method called parse. And we toss it in there, and what it does is it converts all of that FileMaker string data into an actual JavaScript object, and that's stored in our variable called data API. This parses out of that object. It grabs the response element, dives into the data info element, and gets the return count, and that's what gets populated on the web page, right? Whatever that return count was, but that's actually how we dive down into the results of the execute data API results. We delve down into a specific element that we want, which is that return count. We use the dot syntax for that. And if you've done any JSON FileMaker manipulation, you're already familiar with that. And if you're not familiar with that, we can either cover that in another class, or again in the proposed JavaScript object and or JSON and or execute data API class. We can cover exactly what all that means. So right here, I'm diving in and getting just that data array from FileMaker's results, and I'm popping it by itself into a variable called records, because records is all I'm interested in for the rest of this code. Now, this first if statement should make sense to you. This is best practice in FileMaker too. It's best practice everywhere. It's ignore everything else if that return count was 0. If it's 0, we don't want to try to generate errors trying to do work and access data that doesn't even exist. So this if statement right here, which ends here, simply checks, hey, make sure we got at least 1 record back. And if so, continue on. This is what we're going to do. And we create 3 empty variables, first name, last name, full name. We just initiate them to be blank. And then we have an array, an empty array, which is what we're going to pass back at the end when we're all done, JSON result. And last but not least, we have a for loop that's going to loop through all of those records based upon the return count, and it's going to do something. First off, it's going to grab the first name out of our blob of results from FileMaker, store it in a variable called first name. Then we're going to pull out just the last name. Then we're going to create our own variable, which is concatenating the two, last name plus a comma plus a space and then the first name. So we're creating a custom value here. And then here we're going to create our own object. We're creating our first object here in JavaScript, and we're creating an object which is inside curly braces. We have 1 key value pair, full name, and the value is that concatenated string we just did. And this will probably be the most complicated portion of code here because we haven't covered it in class. What this does is it takes that object and it pushes it into that empty array right there. That's all it does. And then it just continues looping. So what happens is that on the second time around, we grab the second first name, the second last name, we concatenate it, we turn it into an object, and we push it into that array that now has 1 object. Now it has 2. And by the way, the push method pushes it into the end of it. So it's first in, last out would be, I suppose, the way to look at that. But anyways, I mean, that's it. That's all we're doing. That logic I just described, you can do in FileMaker in a script. That's pretty basic FileMaker stuff.
Yeah.
You could do this, but we're just doing it in JavaScript instead. But do you see the benefit? So you could do all of that in a FileMaker script, but FileMaker could probably not crank through 10,000 records in less than 4 seconds.
Which is the benefit of JavaScript. And some of the senior people in the community are always talking, like Hansa has been asking Claris to, take more advantage of this to give us more performance under the hood with this kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Right.
There are a couple.
So that's playing with 100 records, then 1,000 records, then 10,000 records. We could, but let's not do that on 10 million records. And then you would see a major performance increase if you were to compare the two, right?
Okay.
The more records you have, the more the FileMaker is going to be left behind in the dust. Let's move on to the next one. I think we're doing pretty good on time.
Okay.
Now, the nice part with what you just saw is that I kept it simple for a reason. You probably would never want to do this in the real world, but this would allow you to kind of take the same code and play with it in your solution, right? Copy and paste it over and try playing it so that you can get it to work in your solution, and you're starting to use JavaScript in your own solutions then, right? And the code, some of it you understand, some of it's a little dark and fuzzy, but the more you use it, the more you accidentally learn. I mean, a lot of what I'm showing you is not stuff that I learned in a textbook or at W3 schools. It was me playing around in FileMaker with JavaScript to come up with something. Isn't that how we all learn? That's how we solidify our knowledge for sure. Let's take a look at the next example. And I'm going to hit this init button, and then I'm going to poke Richard because we're going to run this. And so I want him to be on top of it. I see his attention there. So we've populated our web viewer with some new code. We're on a new section. Now, I need to double check and make sure we're going to not return too many. Create state counts. There it is. What's our limit here? Good. 100. All right. Let's start with the first 100 records. Okay. You ready for me to hit run?
Yeah,
let's see what we get. Boom, done. This is a sub-summary of all of that data. What we did is we created an object every single time we had a state. And so it begins with Louisiana with a count of 1. Then there's, Michigan, count of 1, New Jersey, count of 1. And then all of a sudden we have another Louisiana. Now Louisiana has a count of 2. Now New Jersey has a count of 2. It loops through all 100 records. And this is our end result. This is every state that it used.
If it finds one that it hasn't run into before, it starts a new object. Is that what it's doing?
Yes. And so you don't see all 50 states here.
Right.
Only a portion.
Yeah,
right.
I guess
because it only creates an object if it finds one. Right.
I guess you could write this in FileMaker. I'd probably go slowly.
Yeah, it's basically a sub-summary, right? You can have a count, sort it by state.
Yeah,
you can see a sub-summary by state.
And it's displayed.
Count.
Yeah, because there used to be an example on how to kind of cook this up just within scripts, and I remember that being part of the how to do this in FileMaker 3 book, Pro 3, back in the day, and it's such a neat little technique, but it's very FileMaker specific. This right here is interesting because I instantly see what you did, because it's not really in alphabetical order, because W.J. Warner kind of jumped ahead and was looking. He had a question like, with states and counts demo, we sort high to low in JavaScript question mark. I don't think he's sorting at all in here, right? He's just
but I think I purposely am avoiding sorting at this point because it just adds another layer of complexity.
And you don't need it, because what it's doing is it
don't need it yet.
It finds the one that it's looking for, and if it say you didn't have New Jersey yet, and it would create New Jersey, and then would add one to it. Otherwise, it kind of goes looking for it, and so it's not really in alphabetical order. It's just literally, it's like a Connect 4 game where you, like, if people ever play Connect 4, you have the little slots and you put the little ball, the little round thing, and it goes, and you drop it and it goes ting, 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 ting. So that's what it's doing here. Very simple.
Now over on Pentagon FM, for over a year now, for about a year and a half, I've had available a JSON add-on for FileMaker that can sort JSON arrays by any element within the object. So you could use that add-on to sort this by state. You could sort it by count, and you can sort FileMaker's execute data API results no matter how deep into the object you go. So for me, that was very useful for sorting incoming notes coming in from a vendor. I didn't want to sort by how they were coming in randomly, and I needed them to be in date order. Well, the date order was, a few fields down within the JSON body, so you couldn't do it in FileMaker without doing an import and a whole bunch of custom scripts and stuff. So I did it in JavaScript and made the add-on to where you can give it the path of the field that you're interested in sorting by, tell it to ascend or descend and what kind of number of type it is, whether it's a number or a string, and it'll sort to its heart content. So that was made in JavaScript as well, but that was a side note.
Application. So you're getting a data dump from another source. The data is coming in an order that you don't want. Right. It doesn't matter what it is. And so you load it into JavaScript, or it comes in via JavaScript, and then you run kind of this custom add-on, but more code that allows it to resort, kind of reparses that JavaScript, right, or the JSON, right? It reparses the JSON and recreates a new JSON array in the order that you want. Then you would import that. Is that kind of the idea?
Right, because as you know, JSON, especially from FileMaker or anywhere else, the order of things coming in through JSON is not guaranteed. You can run it several times and get different results as far as what in what order. So using something like that. Yeah, there's no rules for sorting as far as the results go. That's why if you look, sometimes you'll see a single list of fields that aren't in alphabetical order and they're not in creation order. It's like, well, how did it come up with that? Well, there's no guaranteed or standardized way for those results.
Is that a FileMaker limitation, or is that JSON?
No, that's JSON in general, and FileMaker just follows right along with it.
So when you get data out of a source, I mean, I understand that from another data system, if you don't specify a sort order, then you're going to get whatever. But
what I'm talking about is the keys, not the values too. So, right. So your keys are not guaranteed to be like an alphabetical order. I think FileMaker by default might put them in alphabetical order. Well, so you can create an object in random order and you run it through FileMaker and it might come through alphabetized or something. But yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, there's no consistency and it's not guaranteed to come out in the order you think it's going to be. So don't rely on it. All right, we're a little off topic here, but that was the first 100 records. Let's increase that because it gets a little bit more interesting. Let's skip 1,000. Let's go straight to 10,000. So this is going to do the same thing, but it's going to run across 10,000 records. And Richard, do you want to set a counter in your own mind? I'm going to click run right now. That's done.
Okay.
That was 10,000 records.
That was maybe.
I don't think your sub summary is going to be quite so fast.
No, not even close. So.
And you're probably more likely to see all 50 states now at 10,000 records, right?
Yeah, probably a pretty good sampling there.
Matter of fact, if you eyeball this, I would speculate that this right here is probably the max value, 1622 for California.
Yeah, I would assume that, or New York or some. Well, no, California's got the most for the most part, but yeah. Wow. Okay.
So let's bump that up again. Let's go to 100,000 records this time. I mean, that wasn't too long. 100,000 records. Let's do that. Sound like fun?
Okay, ready?
Clicking the button.
1,
3, 4, 3. Oh, we got a spinning beach ball this time.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Did you blow up, or is it still going?
Now you notice the beach ball went to an hourglass. That is probably where JavaScript has finished when the spinning beach ball changes to the hourglass, and the rest of that is probably pushing that result into FileMaker and storing it in that field.
Okay, that was still pretty fast. That's 100,000 records, kind of in a sort. And you did that one.
And that includes the query, right? In FileMaker, that includes the query and getting a result of 100,000 records, then pushing it to JavaScript, then doing the work, then pushing it over to FileMaker and shoving it in that text field.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot going on. Now, needless to say, I have run that on 1 million records, and it's approximately 10 times the amount of time that it just took. I mean, it's not exponential; it's linear. So. You know, what did you count? You thought it was about 10 to 15 seconds, somewhere in that range?
I thought it's probably less than 10 seconds, reasonably. I thought, but
so multiply that by 10, and you have 100 seconds. So less than 2 minutes for 1 million records. That's pretty impressive, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we take a look at that script, it's going to look pretty similar to the last one with a slight change because we're going to be dealing with counts. So state counts, where did that? Yeah, state counts. So that, oh, that was the query. Let's go to, I called it setup this time instead of init. Interesting, changed the name. So this is a little bit more involved. The end of the script is the same. The beginning of the script is the same. I called the function the same thing. The parameter is the same. There's our check to see if it's 0. Here's the work. So we have our empty array. We have our for loop that we do until we hit the return count. And then here we're pulling out the current state. Here's a comment. So if the record matches a current state, and that one's a complicated bit. We are not going to explain how that works. You can just use it. That's advanced. This looks through the entire set of results that we're compiling as we go to see if there's an existing state. And if so, right? And this is what it does if it finds one. This is what it does if it doesn't find one, right? So this is where you create a new state and pop in and push it in. This is if you already found the state, then you then you have to increment the counter, right, inside of it. So that's really all we got going on. It's really not that complicated, but you got some advanced concepts in here, especially this bad boy right here. I mean, that hurts my brain to try to work out. It's just, and I did several different versions of that, and this is the streamlined version that actually worked the way that I wanted it to. So that's what you run into when you develop things, right? You know what you want to do. You go out on the web, you try to find examples of what other people have done. You find their example and you try to fine tune it to what you're trying to do because they're never doing what you're trying to do, right? So there's that whole translation piece going on. Then you have syntax errors. I mean, that's just part of the development process. So this class is not meant to teach you how to do this. I would just say this is an example of some FileMaker work that we did. I wanted to accomplish something. We made it happen. You can use it to your heart's content. It's in the sample file. Tweak it to your heart's content, and let's move on to the last one. Good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Last but not least, we're going to do the same thing. But this time we're going to be working with invoice data, which is that related data, right? So let's go in and make sure that this one is not going to return too many. We got 100. Good. And so with that, let's hit init and run. Boom, it's done. Now this time we have state and count and total and an average. So we're still doing the same thing we did before, but we just keep adding more data to it, right? So each object now has 4 key value pairs. We started off with 1, then we went to 2, now we're up to 4. Other than that, we're still using the same logic. We're still doing the same loops. We're keeping everything the same to keep it as simple as feasible. But now what we've done is now we've got counts, we've got invoice totals, and we've got averages. And as long as the count is 1, the average should be the same as the total, right? But now here with New York having a total of 5 customers that have invoices, here's the total, and there's the average between 5 invoices.
Okay.
Okay. And our record count at the bottom is 29. So we inserted a custom object at the very end now that's not the same as all of the other objects, right? Which is legal. Doesn't hurt a thing. And you can use that in whatever purpose you wish. So now let's change that from 100 records to, let's go to 10,000.
Okay.
10,000. Save that. Come back, run. And about, oh, wow, that was about 2 or 3 seconds, maybe 2. And so there's all of our data, and we might have to actually, is this off the bottom of the screen? What's going on? Can we scroll? We can't scroll. Why? Let's go out of it, back in. No? Oh, man, why are we not getting a scroll inside the web viewer? It's kind of bouncing. It's wanting to, but it's not. Interesting. Let's just grab the text, dump it over into our text editor. So what was that? 10,000 records. So now we have some really much larger totals, and we have some interesting averages. Now, what's kind of interesting is you can kind of tell with my random data that the averages don't deviate to the point of where you think that they probably would. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, since it's not real data, what can you expect? Our biggest count here looks to be Florida. No, California was 472 invoices. Florida was only 134.
Okay.
But you see how fast that was, right?
It's the whole
you can do this in FileMaker, but you would not have 10,000 records that would be a summarized report that fast. It just ain't going to happen. So that's starting to really show the power of what it is we're trying to accomplish. If we take a look at the code, not a whole lot of changes. Really, here's where all of the work is being done right there. Everything else outside of that is same stuff we've always done. So this is really the only change. There's our verification. We found more than one record. There's starting off with an empty result array, starting off with an invoice count of 0. And here's the loop, right? There's the loop right there. And this means that we have an invoice. This means it found a state. This means state found. I mean, there's a bunch of logic going on in here. I've got a few notes to try to help explain things a little bit. But feel free to play with this and dig into it as much as you want. I'm not trying to explain in class step by step how I came to make this work. Mostly, I just wanted to give you a working example so that you can walk away from the class, go play with it, wrap your brain around it, try to tweak it, go through the experience of running into errors that you have to solve. That's part of every developer's set of challenge tools. You have the tools now in your hand to play with it and get something accomplished. What do you think?
No, I think it's great. It's kind of a conversation going on Discord. I think it mostly is a couple people going back and forth, but then there's what limits the states to New York or California. The source data is all the states, and so if you wanted to limit that, you would have to put either a limit in the JSON.
Change the query.
Yeah.
Just change the query, right? Right here. Here's your FileMaker query. Change the query to be anything you want so that you can fine tune that report, right? To just include certain states or one state or whatever.
In there.
This query is what's dictating what JavaScript is chunking through. I just told it to grab the first 10,000 records out of that sample database. That's all I did. So you can tweak that to your heart's content.
Yeah.
And if you've never used the data API, here's a good place to play, right? You know what this is doing. Now try to tweak it. Just make a small tweak at a time, then go make sure it runs. Because you're going to make a tweak at some point in your development career that's going to generate an error and not work. So don't make too many changes because then you don't know where your error was. So I do this a lot. Make a small change, save it, go run it. If it works, great. Go back, make another small change, save it, run it, go verify. And I use the console log a lot to plop data in where things are supposed to be happening so that it shows me at this stage you have this many records. At this point, I'm expecting this value to be such and such. Is it? Dump it to the console log so you can see it. So lots of tools at your fingertips to make your development life easier. But for instance, oh, now we got scrolling. You don't have scrolling inside the web viewer. As soon as you go outside of the web viewer, that'll scroll.
Okay.
Okay.
WJ,
figured that out.
We have some questions you want to chew through. I dropped one here from YouTube. Okay. If bottom there, is there a quick way for the text field JScript results to be pasted to a table or import or export, or is an import export the only way to go? So,
well, to kind of answer that question, let's just go to this script right here. When FileMaker, in the way that I've built it, when JavaScript is done doing what I told it to do, it throws the entire contents back to FileMaker to this script. Here's where I pull it in. You can do anything you want with it after that. I just dumped it into that text field. You modify this script right here to have it do anything you want to with the results.
Yeah, so you could actually take each value from the JSON and have it flip through and rotate and populate records. I mean, it'd be slow that way, but
the possibilities are endless. Yeah.
Yeah. Stu says, does running the data API from the web viewer require extended privileges to be set?
I suppose the answer to extended privileges is whether it's local or hosted. Would you say that's accurate?
When I say, yeah, if you go back to and this is one of those instructor things that I had to learn, extended privileges define how data is shared in a FileMaker solution. So if it's local and you're on a local file, then it's...
I mean, I'm always running a local file with full access. So I presume if you're making a local file that has limited access, then does data API work beyond extended data right here? Is this the question? Is this external or internal? Access via FileMaker Data API. See, I think that's external only. I don't think that has anything to do with execute data API. That's internal.
Yeah, I think that's the
I
file.
think it depends upon the access privileges of the script, right? Of the user with the script, just like it would any other script.
Yeah, that extended privilege, that's a server. We're saying data API. We're talking about the server date from the server side, right? Where it generates that data.
Well, now we have two, right? We have this, which is the data API, but
Yeah.
the one that was in the extend privileges sounded like that was FM REST. That means server side.
That's server side, yeah. So
Right.
So I think for Stu, if it's I mean, there's kind of two data APIs here, right? Right. We have the FileMaker interacting at the local level, and then you have the server kicking it out. Instead of PHP or XML coming out of it, you can generate data out the data API. So that's a good question. You'd have to look that up.
Good question.
Look up that extended privilege set in the FileMaker help, up in the help, wherever help is at somewhere.
Well, we didn't run too far over, and I think we covered everything. Congratulations to everyone. They just passed JavaScript 101's class. Everybody gets an A that participated. And hopefully you learned a lot. And please come see JavaScript 102 and 103 next week, where we will have a lot more real world case. I think we can close the book on textbook stuff. I think that's behind us. I think from here on out, what you'll be seeing is some actual functioning work inside FileMaker, stuff you can do that implements JavaScript in unique ways you've probably never even imagined that you could go. So that's what's coming up next week.
No, I think this is great. Larry says, learned a great deal. This is there's awesome. We appreciate it. Leland Brutterman kind of seconds that, learned a lot. Yeah. I mean, some of you are pretty hardcore coders. So this is like kind of, we're going over well worn ground for you. Come on.
I bet you I'm the only guy that has made FM piano.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little loud. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
but
I'm cringing a little bit, but that's
so I made an add-on based upon requests from Pause on Error this last year from an individual who said her father had been trying to make FileMaker games for years, and he was really struggling with the painful notion of adding sound. So since I had done that in Space Invader, she said, "Hey, can you do something about that?" So I made an add-on. It's on Pentagon FM, and it's async sounds, and you can create your own sound files that play in JavaScript. And that's what I did here. I imported all of these different notes as sound files and then hooked up the user interface to it. And it plays asynchronously. So you can actually have, I don't know if you noticed, but 2 and 3 and 4 notes can all play over each other at the same time. So it was a fun toy to play with, and not your typical FileMaker database, I'm thinking.
No, absolutely. As a real quick recap for those of you, we're getting to this point. I'm going to go ahead and override and share my screen right here. If you go to the fmtraining.tv website, hit the JavaScript button over here. If you want to watch the recordings, they should be being dropped into here. In fact, since we started this, the video team is now dropped in day 2. So day 1 and day 2 are in the can. They're in here, edited and available for you to watch. We'll be dropping in probably day 3, hopefully by Monday, if not sooner than that. And so we're keep banging these away. So you can come back and watch these. And any kind of awkward pregnant pauses where I tell Leland he has no idea what the hell he's doing because he's a moron, those have all been cut out. So it's all been sanitized. And you go back and watch this, because if I was going to do some serious, because of my job responsibilities, I would love to do this, but I don't know where I'm going to find time. But if I was expected to be a serious code person for an organization as a senior developer, I would start here at this, and I would work through with that sample file that Margaret has cross-posted everywhere, and walk through this very carefully and slowly to begin learning this material. Because as a senior developer, in the idea of your continuity of your development progress, brand new developer versus a senior developer, you start as a senior developer, you're going to need to know this stuff, right? This is where you understand where the best performance is. And a lot of times the best performance is in, running with a JavaScript, right? And interacting with JavaScript. So I would love to see JavaScript more openly supported or interacted with by Claris, but it is what it is. So pretty good stuff. So Good Friday, Leland. Good job. Excellent work. Right? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I think what we managed to do, at least at the end of this class, is start to do what I have not seen in the world of Claris, which is we have a lot of DevCon presentations as far as JavaScript integration. We've got a few people out there that are trying to make a living doing some FileMaker and JavaScript work. But really, how many times have you seen real examples other than a chart of why you would want to use JavaScript in FileMaker? And that's what I've kind of spent the last end of this class giving one little example, and next week is nothing but example upon example of here, look what you can do in FileMaker now if you use JavaScript. Real world examples, right? I think that's what we're seriously lacking in. So to me, I think it's a sales pitch that's being missed.
But yeah, so Leland, week 1's done. Week 2 will come up next week. And then for those of you who want to take that third week and once again support Leland and encourage him to come back, feel free to visit the website, or if you come here, you can always say, hey, buy this, and it sends you to PayPal where you can put a couple bucks in the piggy bank and encourage him to come back. So there you go. All right. We'll catch everyone Monday. We'll see you again. I appreciate it, Leland. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir.